Right, welcome back everyone. So next on will be Steve Fenn, joining us from the States. Really pleased that he'll be talking about a new feature of Tableau, so VizinTooltips, and sharing his experience in terms of the positive aspects and the pitfalls to avoid. So Steve, if you're ready and available.
I am, thank you very much.
Welcome and over to you.
Thank you very much. Now, I believe I'm supposed to be sharing my video and that doesn't seem to be working at the moment on Zoom. So give me a moment to troubleshoot that. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Steve. We definitely can't see anything yet though. So if you
All right.
out in a minute or two, give us a shout and we'll give you a hand.
Okay, great. Okay, I think I've cracked it. Am I sharing screen now?
Yeah, we can see you, Steve. Thanks so much for sorting that out.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you all for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is for all of you worldwide. My name is Steve Fenn. I'm a Tableau Solutions Architect for Kforce. On screen, you can see some of the samples of things I've stuck on the Tableau Public in the last few years. And I'm really excited about VizinTooltips. I think it's a great new feature, but there are a lot of other people out there who are quite scared of the bad uses people will make of it. And frankly, both attitudes are wholly appropriate. As with any feature that is really powerful, VizinTooltips can be abused. And I've been somewhat guilty of that myself. When it first came out, a lot of us were kind of like a kid in the candy store and just kind of playing with everything. And we're making our way towards better practice with the tool. And so I want to guide you through how to create VizinTooltips, staying within best practices and good visualization approaches so that you'll be really effective in this use of the powerful new utility of Tableau. So let's take a look at this real quick. Also, let me say, as with all other sessions today, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box within Zoom, not the chat. At the end of the presentation, I'll answer Q&A questions, but the chat window gets pretty gummed up if a lot of people are trying to type in there, and it's hard to follow. Also, after the Q&A, I'll be tweeting out relevant links from my Twitter account, which is @StatHunting. That's StatHunting. The Tableau community, as happens with any new feature, has come up with a lot of interesting hacks and use cases already, and I'm going to try to point you towards many of those and mention some of them as we go today. So we're going to start by talking through the basic whys and hows of VizinTooltip, warn you about bad uses and performance problems with this feature, and then explore some specific use cases and more advanced techniques. So here's a quick example on screen. We've got a very simple visualization, and a follow-up question the audience might have is, okay, so we've got our general trend within every region by quarter, but within any of these quarters and regions, what are our top 10 products? Well, if you just hover over the VizinTooltips, you get it. You've got the total sales for every product on the left, and then the bars are sized by those total sales, and you've got the name of the product in there as well. You can quickly cycle through any of the data points and get those sorts of things. Now, to create any VizinTooltip, first you've got to create a main chart, then a secondary chart, and then in the main charts tooltip shelf, you'll reference the secondary chart. So that's what's been done here. I've got my quarterly sales lines as my main chart. My secondary chart is right here. tooltip of top 10 products, I've named it. I tend to put an asterisk and tooltip at the beginning of the name of any tab like this, and you'll see why in just a moment. And you see here a pill for that tooltip filter that's active. I've also put on an index function to limit the size to only the top 10. Usually it's a good idea to confine the view so you're not trying to display something that's much larger than can be contained inside of a tooltip. So if I go back, I'll wipe out the last line of my tooltip here to show you how I referenced that other field. And if you don't know, you just click on the tooltip menu here to open up this input. So I've got my little headers here. They're just normal tooltip text. I've typed in a top line, and then I've got dynamic references to region and quarter of order date. And then I make sure my cursor is in the right spot for where my VizinTooltip is going to be. Click on Insert, hover on Sheets, and then find the one I want. In this case, it's going to be Tooltip Top 10 Products. By default, we've got 300 pixels by 300 pixels as our maximum. It's targeting that sheet I just chose. And the filter is all fields. We'll get into how to tinker with some of those options later on, but for now, we just stick with the standard. And that gives us the VizinTooltip. Nice and simple. Now, there are a lot of different ways to leverage this feature. The drill downs like this, in my opinion, are the most valuable option available to us within VizinTooltip right now. And they fix two problems that a lot of people have had with Tableau in the past. Standard tooltips can't display multiple dimension values. So if I had put products onto the tooltip shelf here, in fact, I'll show you real quick. If I put product, if I have a product name onto the tooltip shelf, and instead of my VizinTooltip, I just put a dynamic reference to product name, all I would get is an asterisk down there below the region and the quarter. So obviously that's not very helpful. And a lot of audience questions tend to revolve around, well, what's happening at the more granular level? The old approach to these sorts of drill downs was to have a space on your dashboard specifically for those drill downs. So here I've got basically the same view as was in the VizinTooltip, and I'm using a click filter. You just activate the little funnel here, and then once you click on any data point, you're getting your information over there within the dashboard itself. Now that's nice in a sense. It does get something, it gets the information there, but it's taking up a lot of space within the dashboard, and pixels are at a premium when you're building your reports. So it's a lot better to have a setup where it's all right here. And this is a chart that is small enough, it could easily show up even on a cell phone screen, and the VizinTooltips would work there as well. Good luck getting an approach like this to actually be effective on a smaller screen, even a tablet sometimes. Now, again, I'm not saying that VizinTooltip is always superior to this old approach. In this approach, you see here, we have scroll bars. I didn't have to truncate it down to only the top 10. So if it is vital that the audience be able to cycle through a lot of values when looking at details, well, VizinTooltip isn't going to be quite what you need then. You can also include this when you're generating PDF or a PNG directly off of your dashboard, and you could do that via URLs in Tableau as well. You can only take just basic screenshots with the VizinTooltip approach. I need this perspective, we'll make sure that's on screen and then use my screenshot. The other advantage of the old approach is it could have aligned with audience expectation, and they might not necessarily know to look for the VizinTooltip. Now, granted, that strength is going to go away as people just get used to VizinTooltip being a possibility. The big VizinTooltip advantages are they're going to save space on your dashboards, which can be huge. It's kind of a flashier approach that can drive deeper engagement. the connection to specific data points is much more obvious. So say somebody came to this dashboard after this was selected. They probably eventually noticed that, okay, this data point right here has got a little highlight on it. That's probably related to this. But if you're in the VizinTooltip, it's inherently obvious what this list of top 10 products is coming from, because you, the end user, is actually hovering over that data point to generate it. So that's a much deeper connection between the user and the report inherently, because they are driving these things on their own. You can also flip between different perspectives pretty rapidly. And if you set up the VizinTooltip the right way, maybe you get some really interesting insights, and almost a rudimentary animation feature as people look through different options quickly. So those are some main things to keep in mind on VizinTooltip versus the traditional approach. Let me go back on speakerphone here real quick. I was on the headset for a bit because the heater was running in this room, so thankfully I can be hands-free at the moment. Another big advantage of VizinTooltip is custom imagery. So Tableau is quite capable of leveraging symbols. You can load in whatever PNGs, JPEGs you want into the shape folder of your Tableau repository, and then leverage that when making your views. But those are, within a traditional setup, can get really messy. Let me show you an example of custom imagery gone wrong. I'm not mocking anyone else. This is something that I made 5 years ago when I was still relatively new to the tool, and really excited that I could put custom shapes in there. I'm a sports fan. I make a lot of things around soccer, basketball, what have you, that you'll find on my Tableau public page. And so 5 years ago, I thought it'd be a great idea to just make a scatter plot, put the team logo onto the shape shelf, and make a mess. So it can be somewhat effective, but if you're trying to figure out what the outliers are, I don't need the interactivity to figure out if you know what these shapes actually mean, who this one is, etc. But the middle of this thing is just a big mishmash of color that even if you do know what all of these shapes mean, is really hard to decipher. An approach I've been taking lately since VizinTooltips came out is to stick my custom imagery into the tooltip and into the VizinTooltips instead. So here I have a look that was made specifically for soccer fans, but some general context for the rest of you. It's looking at the strategies that teams have taken in terms of how they use a certain resource. So are they spending money to bring in players, or are they using other assets to bring in money so that they can leverage these utilities another way? So I can hover over one of these data points, and I've got those same images you saw in the really muddy scatter plot are now just in a banner at the top. So if you know what these team logos mean, it makes it much faster to figure out, okay, that's Columbus, what they have acquired. Over here we've got Montreal, Portland, and I've got color coding in those banners as well, because the nature of this visualization is that we've got red moving to the left when assets have been traded away, and black moving to the right when these assets have been acquired. Without VizinTooltips, I still might try to use these custom images. Maybe I'd put them in place of the abbreviations over here on the left, or someone might want to make this more of a barbell graph and have the logos on the outer sides. But in my opinion, when you start to get a lot of custom imagery into a visualization, it gets really easy to overdo things and kind of confuse the audience. So I'm really enjoying VizinTooltips as a way to get that extra engagement for folks that know what certain images mean, and get those into the tooltips as well. You'll see also on screen that I've below the banner, I'm still using that detail-oriented approach, because an anticipated follow-up question I'd have for this visual is, okay, so which individual transactions are feeding all of this? So that's what I've put into the visual, into the VizinTooltips below the banner. In similar ways, you might use maps for geographic context, particularly in cases when a map as a main visualization doesn't make much sense. So say you are asked at work to create a map of cities that are colored by a metric. In this case, we'll say it's profit margin. So I've got this visual here. We'll get some states as data points behind that as well. You look at it and you're like, okay, so I can kind of see some pockets where profit ratios are negative, but I wouldn't say this is a compelling geographic trend. So that's probably not going to end up being the main focus of my visualizations. And the audience also might not be looking for the geographic trend. Their question specifically might be, so what are our top and bottom 10 cities on this chosen metric? And usually you want to orient your main visual around the main question that your audience is going to be asking. So in this case, I want to go pretty straightforward. I'd have a bar chart of my top 10 and bottom 10 cities by profit margin. Nice and simple. Again, I tend to organize my main visual around the main question the audience is asking, and then I'm going to think about follow-up questions that I would anticipate from the audience and organize interactivity around those. So I want to have my city and my profit margin labeled on my map, and then I'm using that as my VizinTooltip. Again, I got there by inserting sheets and choosing city-state map. And now as I hover over, the audience might say, wait, where is Abilene, Texas? There it is, nice and simple. Or Stanville, Missouri, wherever you want to go. And I've got it color-coded the same way in both places. Now, a warning on that. With your VizinTooltip, if you do not go to the advanced options, set your start, end, or center, then all of these are going to show up a little differently than you had hoped, because Tableau is going to make some decisions for you, because technically you are filtering out all but that data point. So usually with my graph that's going to be referenced in a VizinTooltip, I'm going to want to set the start, end, and center of that color range so that it aligns with what I've got driving my main view. And I don't get these weird washout effects that I don't intend. You might ask, so why is the state colored behind there? Well, if I didn't have that state dual map, I was only looking at cities, Tableau by default, again, is filtering to only that data point, and it's going to zoom in just on the city alone. And that's not giving you much geographic context. Abilene in particular is right in the middle of Texas, so you don't even see any state borders to figure out what's going on. So I usually want to have a dual axis like that to help me on where that thing is going to zoom. If I don't want to have that actual state colored differently than the rest of the background map, I could set opacity to 0. Again, you click on the color shelf, drag opacity down, and it's still going to zoom out and show you the whole of that state that this data point is coming from. Nice and simple. And this solves a problem that I think a lot of people have come across when they look at other people's Tableau work. People see geographic information and just want to make a map. Well, sometimes that main map isn't going to address the real question that you're trying to answer. So there's some basic ways to leverage VizinTooltips. Let's talk about some problems you might come across with this new feature and how to overcome them. Now, first of all, let's step back and talk again about how to approach visualization, period. And a reminder that if the main chart you are creating cannot be understood quickly without the tooltips, then you need a new main chart. The VizinTooltips are never the point themselves, unless you're trying to make a web app out of Tableau or something. But if you're reporting data, your main chart should be addressing the main questions that your audience is asking. So then you organize the VizinTooltips around the anticipated follow-up questions. And this advice goes for standard tooltips as well. I've seen quite a few times, and I was tempted on this myself when I started using Tableau, that folks put something out and they're asked questions about what they created. They said, well, you have to dig into the tooltips to find out what's going on. That should be a warning sign to you that you didn't build a great initial visualization. A 100-piece pie chart. I've heard people a lot of times say, well, you just got to hover over the data points to find the exact number. Well, maybe find a better visual to convey the key issues. What we're after are quick, actionable insights. And if the audience can't be drawn in by the main chart or find anything that's useful to them, they probably aren't going to bother exploring the interactive features either. Let's also talk about the mixed blessing within VizinTooltips that's kind of easily solved. As you cycle through your VizinTooltips, your audience is going to want to draw comparisons between the things that they see. Now, this is a strength in that it encourages exploration and engagement, but if you're not careful, you will mislead them by accident. Let me go back to my soccer example, the buyers and the sellers. So I have gone out of my way here already to avoid this issue, because you can see that we've got bar charts that don't stretch all the way to the right or the left. The largest transactions we've got in the data set are about $1.6 million. So if we hover over Orlando, and they traded for a particular player, you see that the bar charts go that far, which as they should. But if I were to go to the page that is driving these VizinTooltips, you'll see how I got around this issue. Right here, I've got a reference line that's driven by the biggest transactions. If I did not do this, then every individual VizinTooltip would stretch out as far to the right or left as it could. So let me show you what happens if I take this away. I'm going to drag off that reference line. And I go back to my chart. And now every single time, the largest transaction for that team gets just as much space as the 1.6 million did before. So you want to be very careful about, because if I'm hovering over these as an end user, and not paying a whole lot of attention to the numbers, which, let's face it, a lot of audience members don't, they might say, okay, well, everybody's got one big transaction that's roughly the same. So you want to be very careful not to mislead them in that way. And again, have a reference line that forces the visual, regardless of whether these things are on screen, the big ones are on screen, to be sized the way that they need to be. Now, how did I do that? There are easy ways and there are hard ways. The easy way, if you have data that is not going to be updating, is simply to fix your axis. You can go up to the toolbar here, click on this little thumbtack. Your axis is going to stay the same no matter which data points are being looked at. Now, I would be very careful about that if your data is going to update. In this case, I've got a Google Sheet that tracks new transactions that automatically comes in, so I don't want to bother having to go back and change around my axes. So I created an LOD calculation that would dynamically identify the largest transaction period. I'll show that to you right now. It's a little complex, and you'll have to figure out how to write these things out within the context of your particular data. But I'm looking at the max absolute value of chosen allocation type. I'm wrapping it in the curly bracket, so this is essentially a fixed calculation that's running across the entire data set. And I'm saying if it's a negative value, if it's a positive value, then I'm getting the positive of that largest value. If it's a negative value, then I'm getting the negative of that largest value. And I am multiplying the whole thing by 1.05 because I want to, that's the same amount the Tableau does when it's setting axes by default. So this way, as your audience cycles through, they're automatically going to see these different things that they are subconsciously going to compare against each other, showing up in the same proportions. Important to consider. Again, if it's a one-off, your little fixed axis on the thumbtack is going to do the trick nice and simple. Or if you want to just fix it based on a constant, that can get the job done too. But if it's updating, you don't want to risk the axis becoming too small for certain data points. Be careful with dual axes. If different dimensions define VizinTooltips, by default, all dimensions of the define the chart will drive the VizinTooltips for both axes. In effect, this often leads to one of the axes getting the VizinTooltip and the other with the VizinTooltip staying blank. You can tinker with that with some of the advanced techniques we'll talk about in a moment, but it's just something to watch out for if you've got a dual axis and they're driven by different dimensions or different numbers of dimensions. Then the big one. The elephant in the room on VizinTooltips are the performance issues. So far, we've been looking at all of this inside of Tableau Desktop itself, and Tableau Desktop is much more powerful than the browser in which your audience is going to be consuming your dashboards. So let me pull up the same visual and show you what the audience is going to see when they come to it in the browser. I hover over, I wait a second, it loads up. I hover over another one, I wait a second, it loads up. Always, and this goes for non-VizinTooltips issues as well, always think about the experience your audience is going to have. And after you have published, go into a browser, maybe go into a computer that's worse than yours, open it up in a browser, see what experience your audience is going to get. Now, in this case, it's a 1-second delay. I kind of like that Tableau automatically sizes the tooltip, so you kind of get indication that something's coming. But there have been times when I've had complex main visuals or I've had complex VizinTooltips where that load time becomes 2, 3, 4 seconds. And that gets into the unacceptable range. People have been spoiled by fast internet speeds and they don't like load times. So you want to make sure that you're getting an acceptable performance on these things. Ironically, in my testing, I've actually found that VizinTooltips have loaded faster on my cell phone than on my laptop. Might be something to discuss during Q&A or chat or on Twitter later if others have found the same thing. And I'm not sure why. I'm also hopeful that Tableau will find a way to make these things more efficient as time goes on. But it's something to watch and something to be aware of. And also it's a reason not to just do VizinTooltips for fun. If you're just using it as a coloring hack, if you're using it for dividing lines, you know, if you see any delay on those, it's probably not worth it. But if you're doing something really simple along those lines, maybe you don't see as much of a delay that would cause an issue. Another thing to note here with these delays, if we were looking at a view right now that had both text elements and VizinTooltip elements, you'd see the text immediately, and then a blank area below, like this, that then gets filled in. So those are the main reservations I've found with VizinTooltips. And the other obvious problem that I've kind of warned about all along is think about what you're doing. Make sure you're orienting around an actual follow-up question that needs to be addressed for the audience. If you're just throwing it in there for for the purposes of being flashy alone, don't do it. All right, now let's talk about some more advanced techniques. Yeah, before we go even deeper, make sure you're comfortable with standard visualization and VizinTooltips before you're starting to dive in further with these sorts of hacks. Many applications, this was essentially a basic VizinTooltip. I made some very slight changes to the height of the banner, and that's about it. A lot of the hacking comes through the code that pops up in the tooltip menu when you're creating the VizinTooltip. Let me go back to that menu and look at these options. So we've got our sheet name. In this case, we've got Crest Banners, which is where we had our little custom images at the top and the banner, and then I've got a sheet name of Tooltip Transactions. So those are going to be generated automatically based on what you choose. I'll do it again for this one. I go to Insert, hover over Sheets, and then click on Tooltip Transactions. So whatever I chose in that menu is what's going to be right here, the name of the tab that's being referenced. There are some interesting little hacks that Jeffrey Schaefer and Matt Chambers have come across. I'll link to their blogs after my presentation, in which you could use parameters or even dashboard filter actions to change which chart gets displayed inside of tooltips. I don't think there's a lot of, I'm sure there are real life situations in which you'd want that, but I don't think it's going to be something that you're doing all the time. But it's nice to know that you can do it. If you just reference a parameter value right here, if I were to delete this and insert a parameter that was choose a visual for the tooltip, then that would change dynamically. But not a lot of other things really to be done with hacking at that. But you could put a parameter value in there, get really hacky with the dashboard actions. Again, check the blogs from Jeffrey Schaefer and Matt Chambers on how to approach those. The ones you will probably change pretty often are the max width and the max height. By default, these are going to be the largest bounds of pixels in which these tooltips are going to show up. Right now, I'm going to change the max width of my list of transactions to 400. So it'll be 400 pixels wide. My max height is 300. So let's see that in action. So we've got 400 pixels wide on both the banner and the details down below, and it's max height. So it's only drawing down the amount of space that's needed for that particular team. Now, what if I didn't have enough vertical space? My max height was only 100 pixels. I'd get that nasty little message you see at the bottom of the tooltip right now. View is too large to show. When you're creating your VizinTooltips, cycle through a lot of your data points and look for that warning. If you've got that warning, you've got the wrong sizing on that particular dashboard element. You need to be careful. Couple ways to get around that. Say I move it up to 200. Okay, and I go to a team that's made a lot of transactions. I'm still getting that view is too large to show. I could keep moving up that maximum height. Another approach would be to go to my chart that's being referenced. Right now it lists as fit width. This dropdown is going to be key to how your VizinTooltips are going to show up. If I leave it as standard, then I'm going to decide the exact height and width of things in this window, and that's going to hold up. If I go fit width, it's just going to be however wide I choose on that pixel range in the tooltip shelf. Fit height, same thing. If I go entire view, now my view as I look at it right now looks like a total mess. But if I go back to my chart, it actually shows up. See, this was the data point that just before was saying view is too large to show. It can find all of those to the 200 pixels. It was enough that it could still display everything, and so it works out. The downside of that in this case is I've got a pretty wide range of number of transactions between these data points. And so if I've got somebody that's only made 2 transactions, that starts to look a little bit funky. So in this case, I prefer to have this show up with a max height of 300 because I know that's enough to cover even the highest number of transactions for any team. And within my tooltip transactions, I go fit width. And that gets me the nice effect where those teams that don't have many transactions, who are kind of hard to select sometimes, show up with a small tooltip and every line gets the same height. So that's a way to get around, that's a way that you're probably going to want to tinker with max width, max height, and the standard fit width, fit height, entire view menu when you are creating your VizinTooltips. Something to tinker with, it'll become second nature with practice. Oh, one other thing I absolutely want to point out, and this goes beyond VizinTooltips, this is for all tooltips, period. When we're in this menu, don't overlook these check marks down in the bottom corner. Obviously, show tooltips is going to be there because that's what you're after. But include command buttons. If that is checked, and it is checked by default, then whenever you or your audience clicks on a data point, you're going to get options for keep only or exclude or view data. Unless they have an absolute need for those options, I highly recommend that you uncheck that box. Because if not, your audience can come to this report, try to double click on a data point, and accidentally click keep only, and now they're calling you saying, your report broke. No, well, you could say, well, you broke it. But they're not going to want to hear that. Don't give them the option to break it. Unless they need those keep only, exclude, or view data options, go to your tooltip menu, deselect include command buttons. Side rant over, take it into account. Allow selection by category, I usually uncheck as well. That's a feature that came in 10.3. If you don't know about it, in a standard tooltip, you could click on a dimension and then dynamically all other data points of that dimension value will get a highlight on it. Useful for some scatter plot and heat map applications. Most cases, someone would end up getting distracted by it. So I end up deselecting that in most cases as well. All right, now the hackiest of these is the last option on our little VizinTooltip code, filter. So by default, it's going to be filtered on all fields. So every dimension that defines your main chart is affecting the filter that drives your VizinTooltips. So what I mean by that, here we've got team selling, chosen allocation plus minus as dimensions that are driving the details of this chart. When I go to the VizinTooltip that's driven by it on my filter shelf, it automatically generated, oh, and team selling was the other one. So we've got, so we've got those things showing up as the dimensions that drive the tooltip by default. All fields that drove the main chart are going to affect the other chart. Got another approach here in which I hacked it a little bit. I had a stacked bar chart, and instead of getting information only on the section of the stack that I hover over, I want to have a look at all 3 of them at once, along with a subtotal for that particular quarter. So how did I do that? I've got my main chart here. My tooltip, I've got the text of simply the month and order date. And under my filter, I've got a reference to MY. MY is a calculated field I use to kind of cheat this feature. It's just a concatenation of month and year, because that is how all of these individual stacks are defined. And that means that my pill over here on the chart that's referenced has only my as the dimension that it's running along. And go back and show you what would happen with just the default tooltip here. If I delete this one and insert instead just the standard tooltip of categories monthly. Again, I tend to name my sheets that are going to be tooltips starting with asterisk tooltip, just so that they're at the top of this menu. And now we've got filter all fields. And when that's in place, what I end up with is not what I intended, because it's essentially confining it to only the rows that fed that specific data point. So I've got just my furniture, and my subtotal can't even look past that one data point I'm looking at. So that's why I go into tooltip. I select all fields, delete it, and type in the name of the dimension that's going to kind of hack at this and allow it to look across the entire thing. Side benefit of this with stacked bars is that a downside of stacked bars is kind of a lack of precision in comparing these different values. So this kind of helps us get beyond a limitation of the main chart that we've been requested to build. So people can quickly see which category was largest in that particular month, as well as the overall number. That pretty much concludes my presentation. Again, thank you very much for giving me this space to present, and thank you so much to everybody that has been experimenting with VizinTooltips since 10.5 came out. Jeffrey Schaefer's got a fantastic, he put out 2 different top 10 tips lists for VizinTooltips, one while it was still in beta. Matt Chambers, I mentioned, has done some great things. Kim Florlich was very helpful to me, and as I was preparing for this, pointed out a particular feature that I've been overlooking. Lots of folks with lots of interesting ideas on how to leverage this, and watch the community. I'm sure a lot more interesting uses of VizinTooltips are going to develop. But have fun with it. Make mistakes. That will happen, and learn from them. It's a feature that's really great, but there are little things that'll trip you up along the way. So just practice, and find interesting things to engage your audience with this feature. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got some Q&A here. First question was, can you show me quickly how you have done the top and bottom 10 chart? Yes, let me pull that one back up. Oh no, where is it? Top 10, bottom 10 cities. Okay, so in this particular case, I cheated. I made a list of cities and states, and then I grabbed the top 10 and the bottom 10. There are much better ways to do that. The quickest of which would be, I was not ready for that question. There's an index function and a last function. Oops. Actually, an index function. Oh, I've already made one. This is what I get for trying to improvise. So I've got an index function, and I can go up here and put it on the filter shelf and say I only want numbers 1 through 10. And that's going to grab the first 10 data points that show up on the screen. Click OK. Similarly, there is a last function. So if I shift index to be last instead, it counts from the bottom 0 up. And so now I've got the ones that are in the back. So you can Yeah, not much time left in my presentation to actually do it the right way. So the short answer is, for this particular one, I cheated. But for a dynamic one, you'd want to use index and last together, or use rank functions, increasing and decreasing. I'll see if I can find a blog post that outlines that and put that on my Twitter account as well. Again, STATHUNTING is my Twitter handle. And I think there was another. Andy, have you looked into ways of making conditional formatting within the tooltips? I think there's different ways to interpret that question. I mean, in a sense, I've kind of got conditional formatting of my banners. In my buyers and sellers chart, my banners are red at the top when I'm referencing one of these, and black at the top when I'm referencing one of those. Generally, I think you'd be kind of looking at, so if I went to, hold on, where is my banners tab? Yeah. So I've got a positive or negative dimension that's driving my color over here. And so that's on my color shelf. And so I've got my traded away ones over here and my acquired ones on this side. And only the one that's actually chosen shows up. Let's have a conversation on Twitter about that one, Andy, so we can talk through other ideas of what you meant by conditional formatting. But thank you very much.
That's brilliant.
I hope
thank you so much. Thank you so much for that presentation. We certainly were glued to our screens watching that, and time just went too quickly. So really appreciate you coming on and talking us through that.
Sure.